Regarding certain foreign partner powers, we, like the overwhelming majority of the people of Niger, were surprised by their eagerness to condemn the seizure of power by the National Council of the Safeguarding of the country, to pronounce sanctions against Niger and its people, and to put a de facto end to their security cooperation. This hostile and radical attitude brings no added value neither in the resolution of the new situation born of the seizure of power by the National Council for the safeguarding of the country, nor of our hitherto common fight against terrorism.
The political instability in Niger is a source of grave concern for us all. It threatens our shared vision of a peaceful, secure, and prosperous West Africa, a vision that is impossible to achieve amidst political upheavals and disruptions to constitutional order. The task of restoring democratic governance in Niger is fraught with potential hurdles and complications. However, we cannot afford to be hamstrung by these challenges. Instead, we must confront them head-on, drawing upon our shared experiences, wisdom, and the strength of our collective resolve.
Ecowas has given the Junta a one-week ultimatum to hand over or face severe consequences, including the use of force. After the 1 week, we will seek the direction of the presidents exactly what they will do. But I can say that the member states are ready. If it means using force, the member states will be ready to do that. Armed forces, I can assure you that the professionalism of the Ghana Armed Forces is par excellence, and I'm not worried at all. Not at all. I don't worry about any member of the armed forces taking up arms to say I'm going to remove a government. No, not at all. They would rather protect the will of the people. They would rather not allow anybody to cheat in an election. They would rather not allow anybody to manipulate in an election. But to take up arms to remove a government, the armed forces no, it's beyond that. Armed forces of Ghana is far beyond that.
Right. So as Dominic Nitu, the defense minister, was talking about the intervention which will be for the protection of the will of the people, the question that has to be asked is, in Niger, what is the will of the people? They are on the streets, and they are thousands, and they are very, very jubilant about what has happened. Their country is responsible, that small country, is responsible for a third or more of the illumination of France, the lights, the power that is there. But in their own country, we're told a very small number of that population has seen electricity, that they are responsible for a third of what powers France. Right. I'm joined by Professor Kwesi Enin, Director, Faculty of Academic Affairs and Research, Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. Kwejoa P.J. Chia is Associate Professor, School of Law, University of Ghana, Legon. They are our guests, helping us to briefly look at the issues coming out of Niger and the attempts by ECOWAS, of course led by its leader, Bola Tinubu of Nigeria, to seek to take some steps there. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for making time to join us this morning. Yes, Professor Enin, thank you very much. First of all, do you, as I asked in my introduction, do you think that Africa is back to the era of military regimes, or we should continue to treat these as isolated situations? I referred to a study that showed that sub-Saharan Africa has experienced 80 successful coups and 108 failed coup attempts between 1956 and 2001. And that says an average of 4 coups in a year. And as we know, when coups were rampant, they were staged in the name of corruption, mismanagement, and poverty. Well, the reports are replete that these problems are worse today. There is devastating poverty, particularly in Africa. And African governments are happy to just attribute it to COVID and sit back. So what do you think? If you have a population, 500 million, that's half of the population is in poverty. And when it comes to the survey in 2019 and 2020, Afrobarometer survey about corruption, the people believe that corruption is pervasive, and yet there is a scare to report for fear of retaliation. And the survey in the year again revealed that only 42% of people in 19 African countries believe in removing non-performing governments by the ballots.
Yes.
So what is that? Is this the new trend? Are we going back to military regimes because the problems or the reasons or the justifications used for these regimes are back and even worse than the days when the coups were staged?
Well, Samson, thank you very much. I want to make some preparatory remarks. It is not just the Afrobarometer report that paints a disturbing picture of corruption and of general democratic reversal. If you look at the statistics or the indices from the Mo Ibrahim Index of African Governance, just published a couple of weeks ago, the 5 indices that they use: civil society, security and safety, media, freedom, anti-corruption policy, and then abuse of office. All of them, as compared to the figures from 2019, have seen a dramatic, reversal. Meaning that the spin-off of democratic transitions and democratic growth are not as positive over the last decade as one would have wished. Do the cases of Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger point to isolated cases? I don't think so. I think since my last study that drew the conclusions in 2020, September, that there would be about 5 coups or so, those projections have come true, and the conditions that led to those upheavals considerably worse than 2020. So I think it's dangerous to presuppose that these are isolated cases. Furthermore, the very nature of geopolitics and strategic imperatives of the Sahel and West African states have shifted dramatically, so that those who play critical roles are not the same people or the same states played critical roles probably 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So we need to understand the drivers of these changes, dramatic changes. And what are those? One relates to the demographics and the capacity of government to speak and respond positively to the shifting sands of the democratic expectations of what democratic governance is about. Number two relates to a very false narrative about the importance of particular states as linchpin states in the fight against terror. Now, that is a false narrative emanating from capitals in Washington, London, Paris, and elsewhere. Linchpin states are states that must first and foremost seek the welfare of their citizens. I cannot be a linchpin state in which the nature and character of the security force assistance that you provide serves only your interest. So if you look at the 6 countries that have all presented this false narrative of Niger as a linchpin state, then you ask yourself, is the fight against terror and the perception of Bazoum as a friend of the West, does it inure to the benefit of ordinary people of Niger, or Bazoum had become something like a house slave, a lackey, who dances to his master's tune without delivering public service goods to his people? Furthermore, we are seeing, as I said earlier on, a realignment of forces, friends, logistics, all sorts of things. So these are not isolated cases. People are reading into the shifts and the changes, and are saying, to what extent can we exploit some of these shifts and changes to our benefit? 2 last points. When I heard what had happened in Niger, I asked myself 2 very simple questions. Where will you and I be having this conversation again if and when this happens? Because there will definitely be another one. The second relates to what are the lessons that we are learning as member states of Ecowas and the African Union in ensuring that we can proactively prevent these developments from taking place. Now, I've always argued, and that argument becomes even more important, that when you become a member of an international organization and you voluntarily sign on to binding instruments in which those organizations are incapable of eliciting compliance and behavioral change from signatory states, then those international organizations must begin to look at other instruments for engaging their member states. And you mentioned corruption. You mentioned poverty. Out of the 250 million poor people on this continent, about 200 of them are chronically poor. So the basis for the joy that we see on television depicting what is happening in Niamey is that ECOWAS and African Union should begin to design graduated and incremental responses when they see that member states are beginning to slip in terms of their upholding the rules, the norms, and the principles that they have signed on to. The NEPAD process had such a checklist, but NEPAD, for some strange reason, is not very much on the front burner, and therefore we don't really hear of NEPAD very well. If ECOWAS and the African Union continue to be reactive, then I think the efficacy of those organizations will be reduced over time.
Right. Apart from situations like, Condé's situation where, after having been in power for 10 years or more, sought through, engineering a constitutional amendment so that he could stay on power, for a third term. We had the Yoweri Museveni issues, Alassane Ouattara issues like that. Apart from those issues, when they keep the refrain, corruption, mismanagement, and poverty. If you check with Mamade, he said, and I want to quote him, he said that poverty and endemic corruption, these were the reasons that he gave. Poverty and endemic corruption. We had, the guy in Mali also talking about theft and bad governance. Theft and bad governance. The Sudanese and Zimbabwe generals who toppled Omar al-Bashir in 2019 and Robert Mugabe in 2017 also made similar comments. So it comes down to the governance that produces, as it were, food on the table. But we know that military regimes don't provide the answers to these. So what do you think, first of all, that if the leaders are listening and there is a way out?
No, there is a way out. But there are a couple of challenges to get to the way out. Now, those who take up arms against the state will always find all kinds of excuses, some of them legitimate, most of them not. And let me make this point also, that in talking about coupism is because, and I like the point you made, are the leaders listening? Were they to listen? These are desperate cries for changes in the character and the quality of governance. Because perceptions do play a very critical role in how citizens look up to their government. Perception is very key. Now, we also know that coup d'etats undermine the military as an institution itself. So if you talk to a number of serving and retired men and women of armed forces, they will tell you that coups are not good for the institution itself. That being said, the onus lies on those who have willingly and on their free will come to the populace and giving their word on their honor that they will work tirelessly to deliver public services. When the public perception begins to shift, that the promises that were given were either false or were deliberately manipulated, knowing that the promises could not be kept, then it raises the question as to whether that process that led to the victory does not undermine constitutionalism, because it was based on hype. And I think that is what the Liberian president, George Weah, is talking about constitutional coups. And I think he's consistently been very concerned that there are ways and means in which constitutions are undermined and overthrown, in which guns are not involved. So I think we need to broaden our conceptions and understanding about.
You're referring to George Weah. This is the statement that is attributed to him. I understand from a certain quarters that there's some denial of it, but this is a statement. This is a statement that is attributed to him. Quote: "As long as ECOWAS tolerates institutional coups that allow lifetime presidencies, and fraudulent declaration of election results, manipulation of judicial announcements, there will always be military coups. And we cannot condemn military coups when we do not condemn those who carry out institutional coups. Ecowas should work for the interest of our peoples. This is a statement that's attributed to him, but like I said, there is some reports that it is being denied. But now my question to you before I go to Dr. Appiagyei, Professor Appiagyei, is this, that we understand that whilst some predict and project that Africa must prepare itself for the eventuality of more coups in the coming years, it is expected that for strong or countries with strong institutions such as South Africa, Africa's most industrialized, Ghana, Botswana, may not be, may not suffer such fate, but the poorer and more fragile states, and poorer and more fragile states, Mali, Niger, Chad, Guinea, where we have seen these things repeat themselves. 15 of the 20 countries topping the 2021 Fragile States Index are in Africa, including Cameroon, Central Republic, African Republic, Somalia, South Sudan, as well as a few larger nations, we are told, like Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia. So, and of course, Nigeria is also mentioned in there, our most populous country in Africa. So, whilst those who watch these things say we should expect that these will continue, they are careful to say that there are certain countries which are poorer and weaker which will face this. But there are other countries that have stronger institutions that will not face this. What do you say?
No, I think there are always exceptions. So, for example, you see both Benin and Togo making fairly positive progressions towards strengthening institutions, opening the space for more collaborative political engagement and activity. Then we see, probably until recently, the most stable West African state, Senegal, over time deteriorating to such an extent that last week or so, the opposition party was banned, the opposition leader on trumped-up charges thrown into prison, and you begin to wonder the calculus from Macky Sall in pulling back from the brink for his third-termism and the sudden decision to clamp down on opposition politics. My argument is that the timing of Sall's behavior is closely linked to the fortunes of the Wagner Group. I will not be surprised if something happens and Sall says, look, the situations have changed, I now want to run for a second. Okay, so we need country-specific analysis and understandings of the actors who are involved in some of these political processes and political decisions. But even for a strong country like South Africa, we realized at a point in time that there was the state capture by the Gupta brothers. But when you have strong institutions, individuals who are members of these institutions who are willing to put their reputations and sometimes their lives on the line, then it becomes a contestation between the pecuniary interests of particular groups in these countries and then other individuals who are speaking and working for the larger good of the state. So there are always these contestations also in Ghana, in Botswana, in Namibia. So my assessment is that while these democratic reversals will continue, we will will see also a pushback from our institutions and democratic forces, insisting that governance be improved, that the quality of life be improved, that security and development must go hand in hand so that people will see the benefits of the democratic intervention.
Right. So let me still have you just for a minute. We know that the ECOWAS leader Bola Tinubu, president of Nigeria, is taking steps and calling on the community for solidarity towards reversing what has happened to Mohamed Bazoum. Now, we have the northern senators of Nigeria, of course, because of the closeness, and we understand that these people, the population in Niger depends heavily, on some importation as far as food and other things are concerned from Nigeria. They share border with Sokoto, Kebbi, Katsina, Zamfara, Jigawa, Yobe, and the Borno states. And they say that the manner in which ECOWAS is seeking to intervene will adversely affect the country and may even lead to a certain, war in the sub-region. So they believe that the approach should not be military. It should be talking. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Libya, also they believe that will be affected if military force is used. You don't share that view?
I will nuance it even further. For those who know their history of West Africa and the way ECOWAS was established, led by Gowon and Achampong, our own late Colonel Achampong. And if you read Achampong's speech at the inaugural meeting of ECOWAS, those military heads of state who met were driven by a larger sense of community and integration, and understood, or their advisors made them understand the complexity but also the interdependence among these different nations. Because beneath the nation state are the sub-nationalities that crisscrosses our boundaries. And if you get me to your studio one of these days and you put a map of West Africa on the screen, and I'll show you the caravan paths, the villages and the towns where people are, then you would understand the admonition for caution. Nigeria's biggest dam, the Kanji Dam, was built because there was an agreement between Niger and Nigeria that Niger should not dam its portion of the Niger River. So you may want to cut off electricity now, but that goes against the established interest of Niger. That's number one. Number two, I think I understand President Tinubu very well. New president, democratically elected, he has a challenge in court. He's now the ECOWAS chair.
Yeah, but Prof, he has his own problems, does he not? His legitimacy.
What I'm saying.
His legitimacy within Nigeria itself is a subject of a challenge. And Nigeria has also declared a state of emergency, because people are going hungry. The population is not likely to support, spending extra money for this particular purpose, and so on.
Yeah, so just give me the chance to explain. That was what I'm coming to. That he has a case in court. He's a new president. He's a new chair of ECOWAS. He needs to be seen to be doing something. Okay, taking into consideration his own domestic challenges. So you would notice that when the presidents met and they gave 1 week, the 1 week ends tomorrow. Now the question then becomes, when the presidents met, were their military chiefs with them? And was this conclusion based on the advice of their military chiefs? But 3 processes have already started. So ECOWAS has sent 2 missions to Niamey, to start the process of getting President Bazoum out of house arrest. That has not been successful. The president of Chad, who himself is not constitutionally elected, was also sent. So that the intervention and the actions here and now seems to be almost contradictory. And therein lies the caution and the advice. Now look, based on our history of interventions and coups, then let's begin, backdoor channels in which we move from a win-lose situation to a win-win.
Okay.
And I think that is what will happen.
Okay. Let me bring on Professor Appiah-Tuah now. And Prof, could it also be, as others suggest, that these African presidents, particularly in ECOWAS, who are in a hurry, to support a reversal of the situation, they are just puppets of the West, France, and we know that particularly that France will suffer because of this situation. So they are not likely to support Mali and Burkina Faso, who have, declared intention to join forces with the Niger to fight, if anything of the sort, was done.
I can assure you,
yes,
that more often than not, because of the nature of our politics, we tend to think, these guys, they don't know what they are doing. I just want to give you 2 examples. When ECOWAS intervened in Liberia in 1989, Perez de Cuellar, the Secretary General of the UN, said they could not consider Liberia and the ECOWAS intervention because the UN agenda was full. Babangida and Rawlings decided that they will intervene with our scarce resources. I can tell you that our military chiefs and some of the less, strident advisors of our president will ask for caution. Because the military chiefs, they know the arsenal. They know the history of France. They know the history of the US. The United States moved its troops out of Niger when 4 counterterrorism experts were killed. Cameroon is in war right now. The US has pulled out the support that it was giving to Cameroon. So our military chiefs, yes, they will do what is best, but they will also put on the table options in which the military option will be the very last, because they know it is their life and the lives of their men and women that will be on the line.
All right. So your last word before you take leave of us. Do you sincerely believe that if Niger's junta keeps to its stance, the agenda as is being discussed now to strike will happen?
No, it will not.
It will not?
Striking will be the absolute last, option.
It has not happened anywhere there has been a military takeover. Why should it happen in Niger?
Because of the geopolitics that I've been talking about, the multiple interests and the embedded interests. Let's not forget, China has put in 4.6 billion. China is building the longest pipeline, to get Niger oil to the coast. So the interests are massive. And I think a military strike may not necessarily reverse what is taking place.
All right.
Negotiations will take us much, much, much further, save lives and also save property.
Thank you very much, Professor Kwesi Enin, Director, Faculty of Academic Affairs and Research, Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. Kwadwo Appiah-Tuah, Associate Professor, School of Law, University of Ghana, joins us. So, Prof, there were questions I was putting to you, but I got Professor Enin to speak about them briefly. Can you also share with us where you stand on this? Is it your thinking that the reaction of the African leaders, particularly in Ecowas, is just to serve the purpose of the West and those other, foreign countries?
Thank you very much, Thompson. I think that point is very good. It's a very fair point to make, that African leaders want to serve the interests of the West, because so far we can observe the kind of rhetoric coming from these countries about the West, anti-Western sentiment. And so if you look at the landscape of Africa at the moment, we realize that we are going back into the bipolar world period, the Cold War period. And now even people are talking about a tripolar world, with the West, Russia, and China. And so countries are beginning to align themselves or realign themselves. If you look at what happened in Russia, when Russia recently called their Russia-Africa summit, you realize that a number of African countries did not take part. It is an indication of the realignment we're talking about. And so you have countries like Ghana and others that are strongly opposed to the war in Ukraine, and they are also, in this context, opposed to the coup d'etat in Niger. So as it is now, the West has already indicated, for example, the U.S., how much money they pumped into Niger and how they want to ensure that Bazoum remains in power. So you can see the geopolitics coming into play here. But apart from that, African states themselves, especially West African states, are also trying to fail to recognize that when there is a coup d'etat, it is not only about the fact that there's an unconstitutional attempt to change government, but there are also other unconstitutional changes in government which point in the face of African leaders that there is a problem with maladministration, there's a problem with corruption, there's a problem with bad governance. Because when you look at the Lomé Declaration on unconstitutional changes in government, it talks about coup d'etat, yes. It also talks about changing government through mercenary activity. It talks about changing government through civil war or coup d'etat. These are where, you can say, violence is involved. And these are where governments come to power through unconstitutional means. But there are two more. The fourth one is where a government refuses to leave office after losing elections and therefore fighting for power sharing and what have you. The other is where a government decides to change the constitution or to doctor it in order to stay in power beyond the normal two-year term limit. And that's what we call third-termism. These are the two factors which remain, as Professor Enin was referring to, if you look at the Mo Ibrahim indices, if you look at Afrobarometer and so on, are issues that are occurring and which is creating that illiberal democratic environment in many African countries. We are sliding on the democracy scale, and that is scary because it connects to the Afrobarometer survey, which says that majority of people are willing to accept military takeovers, and this is about 56%, and the majority of these 56% are youth. So if you factor in the general democratic environment the world over, if you look at Europe, you will see far-right parties coming to power in countries that a few years ago nobody would have imagined or envisioned that a far-right party would come to power or be a kingmaker in the politics of those countries. Nationalism and patriotism or populism are also influencing the dynamics in the African context. And so I strongly agree with Professor Enin that the environment is changing in such a way that you cannot guarantee democracy at this moment. And then more coup d'etat may occur. And now, in Niger, the West has come to realize that if we say that we are just abandoning Niger, then we are allowing Wagner to come in and take over. And in fact, it's true, U.S. has pumped a lot of money in terms of security in Niger. And so they want to protect that interest. But rightly so, China is also in Niger. They also have their interest to protect. So the geopolitics is reaping its ugly head very fast, especially in West Africa. And we need to be therefore very careful about how we tackle this issue. It is not to make a rash decision and say that we're going to Niger to overthrow the government and restore democracy. It is easier said than done. But I think African leaders would want to pander to the interests of the West and say that this is what we support this idea. We want to go in there and make a statement. If you look at the whole of changeover landscape in Africa, it is only Sierra Leone through Ecowas and Comoros some time back that there have been military successful attempts to change government and to return the overthrown government to power through after a coup d'etat. So it is important to look at the dynamics and to adopt a more pragmatic approach that can find a solution to this coup d'etat issue which is coming up. And I can tell you more may come if we don't sit up and realize that unconstitutional change in government is not just about coming to power through unconstitutional means, but trying to stay in power and trying to foment divisional interests and so on in order to maintain power and rely on corrupt governance to stay in power. That is another recipe for more coup d'etat to come.
More coups may be expected, but particularly in poorer and fragile African countries. Now, whilst the excuse, as you also reiterated, has to do with, corruption, mismanagement, and poverty, that democracy is not delivering the dividends. There is also no guarantee that military regimes will deliver the dividends anyway. In any case, it's been found that in the majority, military regimes have been really bad, and democracies give us a better space to develop. Yes, the corruption is pervasive, as the Afrobarometer reports all show us. Survey in 19 countries. You and I sit in this country, and we can play the ostrich that we don't see. Of course, people will normally, when it suits them, they will say matters of courts, but we know that courts don't always exactly determine the truth. Ordinary people can see the corruption. They can see it, they can feel it. They may have difficulty in tracing the exact source of the corruption. But we sit in this country and we can see it clearly. A party comes into government. This particular party has been in government for a while now. And we know people who didn't have anything, who have suddenly become millionaires in the country. And you may say you can't accuse specific people because you'll be taken to court. But the people are seeing it. Do you think that the leaders in these democracies are taking any lessons that this same matter of corruption, which is the biggest, mismanagement, which also leads to poverty, is what will make them suffer?
Well, in the first place, let me say that military regimes don't come in to solve any problem for any country. If we just take the example of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea-Bissau, they said that they came to power because of the security situation, and they will make it better. Has it become better? Certainly not. A secondary issue they also raised is corruption. Has corruption been dealt with? Certainly not. In fact, some statistics indicate that the situation, the military situation or the security situation in Burkina Faso, for example, has been made worse since the time the military regime came to power. And so military coming to power don't necessarily solve the problem. And I think I've made the point, and I will say it again, that sometimes a coup is necessary, but with a caveat. Where there is no means to change government, where there is high level of instability, where the country is tearing apart, a coup d'etat may be justified. But those that orchestrate the coup should not have in mind that they want to take over the regime and rule. They just want to restore democracy. So after a coup d'etat is successfully undertaken, immediately steps should be taken to return the country to democracy. And the military will go back to barracks. Well, the military is said to be an apolitical institution. Their place is the barracks. Their place is security. But where we have a situation, which is also very important to note, where the military and the security forces, the role they play, when we have governments that are corrupt, when we have governments that are only interested in furthering their own interests while in power, the support they get from the military and the police is also something we need to take careful attention to.
All right.
Unless they get the support of the military and the police, they cannot stop people who want to go on demonstrations, who want to use legal and human rights-based approaches to question government and to change government. So if they want to go on demonstration and the police, the power of the police unleashed on them to disrupt the demonstration, to shoot at people and so on, the military and the police are supporting the regime. And for that matter, where some excesses are committed by these security agencies in the country, the government also keeps quiet. For me, a good example is the Sama situation, where clearly, constitutionally, on human rights grounds, the military was at fault, but the government was not ready to condemn it. And up to now, nothing has been done for the people of Asama.
All right.
So we need to take that into account. And then the corruption issue, we also need to consider that people, that is why Transparency International brought about this perception idea, because it is difficult to take a corruption issue to court, especially if you apply the criminal law approach. And so increasingly, we are going by the human rights law approach, where people express themselves in a level of perception that they come out of it, should be an important indicator that corruption is a problem, and that if it is not tackled, it may lead to the consequences we are having in these countries we're talking about. The fact that a country has strong democratic credentials doesn't guarantee that there could not be a coup d'etat in such a country.
All right.
Because if you look at the example of Senegal, Macky Sall has, in a few number of years, completely turned the democratic fortunes of Senegal. When there were a number of coups d'etat in Africa in the 60s and 70s, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Botswana were some of the few countries that had or maintained strong democratic credentials. But Macky Sall has turned everything upside down in a few weeks. And the possibility of a coup d'etat in Senegal cannot be guaranteed, may be possible.
All right. Thank you very much. Kujua Piejetua is Associate Professor, School of Law, University of Ghana. We take a quick break, and when we return, Dr. Theo Champon, Political Risk Analyst and Economist, Isaac Adongo, MP, Boga Central, and Member Finance, Trade, Industry, and Tourism Committees of Parliament, Dr. John Ampontia Kuma, MP, Ejuso, and Deputy Minister of Finance, will join us to check how exactly the corner has been turned.